welcome to the Brain Development Podcast. We're here to show parents there is a pathway to healing the behavioural and learning symptoms of their autistic, dyslexic, ADHD, OCD, Asperger's, dyspraxic and dysgraphic child. And our purpose is to help empower parents to understand how they can build their child's brain from the bottom up to invoke change. And today, because we had such amazing feedback on how we interpret labs and what the labs are telling us about what's going on inside our children, is we've brought Vicky Finlayson back in to go through some more labs, because the more we see patterns across all of these different labs, across every child, and they're all posing similar but very, very different profiles. And what we want to do today is to take you through some further labs, because what is very prominent is that these labs are showing us that it's our environmental factors around our children that can be and are causing some of the things that we see in our kids. And what I mean by that, by environmental factors, is it could be mould exposure. It could be viruses that have either been passed down by mum. It could be viruses that they've caught and their immune system just is not strong enough to kick that virus out, and that virus is still within their body. And then they catch another virus, and they're all playing within this little system, which is your child's body. And there could be pesticides. It could be different metals, and toxin exposure. It could be vaccines. It could be many, many layers that we need to then look at and unpick across our children. And this is why doing labs is just so incredibly insightful into what to do and when to do it at what stage, because it is literally layers that we need to strip back. And what we see within some really amazing lab testing is, in a neural zoomer plus test, this really gives a very insightful view as to what viruses and things are going on within the brain for brain inflammation. And then we have stool testing and organic acid testing, and I'm going to leave the expert to talk through them as to what we see. So we've got a few examples. So over to you, Vicky.
Thank you so much. So I'm so excited to share this with you today, because for me, as I was going through this journey with my daughter, and I know the same was for Lara, we found that lab testing was like a sort of beacon of like light throughout, sort of guiding us where to go next. And that's how I work with labs, how we work with labs when we work with the children in practice. And the good thing about the lab testing is that it's empowerment and education. So, in a mainstream environment, and this is something I'm really passionate about, is changing this narrative of, oh, this person has autism, or oh, this person has Down syndrome, or whatever other diagnosis that is clipped upon them. And then every single symptom that they have is as a result of that diagnosis. Well, that's absolute BS, as we know, because when we then delve down deeper into the lab work, we see that there's like this and this and this and this, and there's all these imbalances that are making up the symptoms of this diagnosis that our child has. And actually, at the end of that, what we realise is that the two things can be sort of separated apart. And so there is a medical side to that diagnosis. And this is what we like to uncover, because actually a lot of the symptoms that we call like autism, for an example, we can reverse or incredibly, profoundly and significantly improve when we address and balance the things that we find underneath the surface in this lab work. And so today I'm going to talk about a couple of labs, and the first one I'll go through is a Neural Zoomer Plus, because this is a lab test that we run routinely in practice, and it's really, really helpful for showing us kind of what is going on inside the brain from an antibody perspective. And I'll share my screen now so that I can give you some more information about this so you can see. I know you can't see on the podcast, but on the YouTube channel you'll be able to see this. If I can share my screen, because I'm not very technically able, so we'll see if that actually works out. Right, okay, so I think I've managed to share my screen. Okay, so um, this is a Neural Zoomer Plus that we did on a patient, and I'll give you a bit of a backstory. So this patient is has autism, and they also have epilepsy, quite severe epilepsy, to the point where they're on a couple of types of medication to stop seizures from happening. And this child has a few words, but is pre-verbal really, and you know, they have some struggles in daily life where they can struggle to focus and struggle to calm down and get quite heightened to the point where it kind of impedes daily functioning. But this child is absolutely beautiful and vibrant and stunning and amazing. And when I say stunning, not on a aesthetic sense, I mean in their soul. They are like, every video I get of this child, it just lights up my life because she's so amazing. So anyway, so I'm going to go through sort of under that diagnosis, what is going on in her brain to cause some of those behaviors that we see. So when you look at this test, you'll see anti here. So anti basically means that there is an antibody that has been created towards this area of the brain, and this is tubulin. So tubulin is like a structural component of cell membranes, like neuronal membrane, which is obviously unhelpful if your immune system. So if we I'll just explain in simple terms what an antibody is. It's something that your immune system creates towards something that it perceives as a threat. So an illness that enters your body, or a bacteria or a virus that your body sees as a threat, it will create an antibody towards that to kill it off, like an immune response. So essentially what's happening, and what the Neural Zoomer Plus shows us, is the antibodies that your immune system is creating towards specific areas of the brain. And obviously from a neuroinflammation, from a like your child just being able to feel calm, regulated, learn, focus, sleep, speak, do any of those things, if your immune system is continually attacking and like areas of their brain, that is obviously very unhelpful from a functionality perspective. So in this lab test, it shows us sort of an IgM. From an IgM perspective, that means that's an active infection or an active immune response going on. And an IgG means that that is a past memory. So at some point in this child's life, something has triggered antibodies to be created towards this specific brain protein. And this is sort of what I'm going to show you as we go through. And then there are, just to give you a bit of insight on this, and we'll go through at the bottom, because this child has several viral and bacterial immune responses. What tends to happen is that the child will develop a virus or have a bacterial infection, and because the immune system's very overwhelmed and confused, it will cross-react with specific brain proteins. And I'll talk more about that as we go through, which ones that looks like. So like I say, so this is an antibody towards this area of the brain, which is structural component of cell membranes. And of course, that's a myelination agent. So myelin is like if you imagine like a copper wire that is an electric conductor or electricity conductor, there's an insulating sheath around it, and that's what myelin does for your brain cells. So if you've got brain cells trying to connect and send signals towards each other for like speech or communication or just functionality, like we also, our brain cells are sending like all these messages for functions, to get us to do things like I'm doing now, like with my hands and like speaking and all of that stuff. The myelin around that is the insulation for that. So you think if that's been broken down by the immune system or is being attacked by the immune system at some point, it's going to make the transmission of signaling between brain cells slower. And again, that's very unhelpful from a cognitive perspective in a child that may have cognitive delays or other behavioural things, which we'll cover as well. And then as we go through, you can see here, so which means there's an antibody against the immune system has mounted an attack against this RAGE peptide. So this is like blood-brain barrier. So in your, you've probably heard of like leaky gut. Well, that's a similar thing that happens in the brain. So there's like a mucosal layer that should be tight, and the junctions there should be tight, so that only specific things can get through to the brain and like be absorbed. And when that's too leaky, it means that toxins and other unhelpful, they are harmful, byproducts can be allowed into the brain and cause toxicity there, which is obviously not helpful, again, for a child that is trying to function and trying to execute cognitive ability. That's not going to be helpful from that perspective. And then something that I see very, very, very often on these labs is an antibody towards the dopamine receptors. And as you can see from this one is also elevated, but these are all past antibodies that have been created. And essentially, the dopamine area of the brain, or like the basal ganglia, like the dopamine receptors, are responsible for reward control, movement. You're just feeling satisfied when you complete a task. So like I tick things off a list and I get like a dopamine hit and I feel satisfied with that and I can sort of get on with my day for a bit. If this area is being attacked by your immune system, it means that that area is desensitized. So this can show up in many different ways. So it can show up as OCD, because if you imagine OCD is almost like seeking dopamine constantly. And I've had this to the point where a child has to touch a surface, like it impedes all functionality in their life. So essentially what will happen is a child, when this is very elevated, because the dopamine sensitization is not there, or it's been desensitized, it's like they're just constantly searching for a dopamine hit to the detriment of actual life and existence. So it's like their whole kind of existence is to fulfill that dopamine hit. And so they're like, that might be a touching thing, it might be a movement, it might be a light switching on and off, it might be a repetitive thing they need to watch over and over. That's not living, and they get stuck in this loop where they have to constantly just be doing this thing to get that reward hit, and that's kind of how it works. And that's why you see these kids with like this constant sort of, that might be like a repeating of a different word, or a tick in the throat, or something like that, or a movement that might look atypical, but they just like doing it. It can also cause tics also. And then, so that is very, very, very common in our kids. And one bacteria that cross-reacts with that, we'll move on to Epstein-Barr in a moment, but you can see here in this lab, this strep is so high, it's actually in the risk zone. And again, this is IgG, so this is a memory. So at some point, this child has been exposed to strep, and what has happened is strep cross-reacts with this area of the brain. So instead of the immune system attacking the strep, getting rid of it and dealing with it, because strep looks really similar to the basal ganglia area of the brain, like the dopamine receptors, the immune system will attack that area instead. And we see this like really, really commonly in our children. And it's why this whole like leucovorin thing really is really disappointing, because that whole cerebral folate deficiency thing that we've discussed on earlier podcasts is a kind of autoimmunity. And by flooding the system with folate, it's just not really helpful, because you're not actually dealing with the underlying autoimmunity, which could look like this. And this is why, and just a side note, if anyone asks me if they should do a FRAT test, I will always direct them to this instead, because a FRAT is checking for one antibody, whereas this can tell us loads of different antibodies and also some of the infectious agents that have driven that. And so it's so much more comprehensive, easier to do. You don't have to ship it on dry ice. It's not a fortune. And it shows us such a more of a significant picture in terms of what the immune system is doing, rather than just one antibody, which is not overly helpful. So, anyway, so that's that. And as you can see here again, so her Epstein-Barr virus is like over 30, again, massively in the risk zone. This is a past infection, but this is showing us that there is immune activation towards this virus. And this is her immune system is kind of just stuck in a loop. And it's why you'll see a lot of our kids, when the immune system is busy and kind of stuck in this kind of overactivated state, the innate immunity will be completely suppressed. And it's why parasites and yeast and all those sort of like niggly things, you just can't get rid of them, because the immune system is not modulated or in the proper kind of zone to be able to do what it's effectively supposed to do, which is killing off the shit, for want of a more scientific way of putting it, that we deal with day to day. It just doesn't have the ability to do that. And in these children, when you see this overactivated state, you will find that they are sick constantly, or they're never sick, because it's like the immune system is kind of confused. So it's either constantly kind of activating an immune response, or it doesn't activate one at all. And so they're things to look out for when you, if you have a child like this. And then if you see this here, like you'll see Epstein-Barr, and on this lab particularly, there might be different variations of this. And sometimes I actually forget what all of these mean, but essentially these ones on here, so EBNA1 and the GP125 and
but they're all really
P18.
high, right? They're all really high.
Yeah. So her immune system at some point has contracted Epstein-Barr virus, which a lot of us have, but hers are so high.
Yeah.
This means that her immune system is stuck in the like it's stuck in a kind of memory of like activation, like beating this virus. And the thing is with these can reactivate as well. And I see this so frequently in practice where, so these are all past infections, they're not actually active, but and then obviously you could go on and do other labs to see if these were active infections, but really you don't need to at this point. What we know is that the immune system is not doing what it's supposed to. And also that what I do find a lot with these is that if there's a picture like this and the child might be doing really, really well, and these can reactivate. So then what happens is someone in their environment might get sick with strep, for an example, and it reactivate. And instead of us seeing, because someone will say to me, but we never saw symptoms of strep, even though the whole family had strep. But in our kids, because of the immune system, and this is where we have to sort of really understand this vividly, look at what's happening here. Instead of the immune system actually attacking the strep, it's not doing that. It's attacking other brain areas.
Yeah.
So instead of seeing what we would typically see in a streptococcal infection, where might be a sore throat or fever, our kids might go into OCD, or they might be more aggressive, or you might see more autistic symptoms. You know, they might regress into more autistic behaviours, because instead of the immune system doing what it's supposed to, mounting a response, creating a fever, getting rid of the bacteria, it's actually cross-reacting, and instead of attacking strep, which is in the body at this point and activated, it's attacking the brain instead.
Yeah.
And this is essentially sort of, you know, what we see constantly in practice. And you know, anyway,
that's
so
PANS, PANDAS type symptoms, or more PANDAS.
So PANDAS is only strep, because that's what the S is on the end. But for PANS, I mean, if I saw a child like this, and obviously you can't actually diagnose PANS from this lab, but you can read between the lines and you can look at this and go, okay, this person has autoimmunity, or her immune system has created antibodies towards all these areas of the brain, especially like ones that are very significant, like myelination, and like there's autoimmunity, there's inflammation, and there's the dopamine. And then she's got all of these infections. So she's got viruses and bacteria, and they're all in the risk zone. So from my perspective, this would look, but the problem is with the PANS and PANDAS diagnosis is it's usually driven by, so they do lab testing, and actually it's not even recognised that diagnosis in I work with a lady at the moment and her little boy, and it's so obvious that it's PANDAS or either one, because every time when he flares, he like goes into this deep OCD, and he can't break out of it, and it's debilitating. But when she takes him to the neurologist, he laughs her out of the office and says, "Oh, PANS doesn't exist," and it's just so ridiculous. Of course, no, and that's the thing. So, but I mean, what we know, and the salient point here, guys, is just to sort of always say that it doesn't, you know, from my perspective, it doesn't matter what the label is. Essentially, if we can look underneath and figure out all this, we're going to peel back layers in the same way anyway. So whether your child's diagnosed with PANDAS or PANS or autism, or, you know, speech delay or global developmental delay, whatever the government has decided to whack on them as a diagnosis, essentially, look, what we're looking at is the underneath stuff. And we're not looking at the top end anyway. We're looking at the underneath stuff, and we're just peeling back each layer individually anyway, so that, you know, we're not going to go, oh, this child's got PANDAS, right, do this. Do you know what I mean? It's like we're looking at the individual as we do, the intricacies of like what is going on inside this human being individually, in lab work, in diet, in lifestyle, in their environment. And then we're modifying and modulating that based on that person, what they're able to do, what is realistic for the family, and we go on like that. And that's kind of how it works, isn't it? So anyway, yeah, so this little person that we're discussing, we're actually going through a protocol at the moment to deal with some of this. And there's a couple of things that we do, but because this person has epilepsy, we have to be really careful with what we use, because you can't use some of the really strong immune modulating herbs that I would typically use for this picture, because some of them can trigger seizures. So I find really helpful for these kids I like mollalaurin because it's high fat, and this works great with a keto diet. I like lysine for viral replication. I like microimmunotherapy, which is a therapy that's really lovely, and I've used it on myself and my own family for specific viral things. And I use homeopathy as well for those kids. But there's lots of different ways that we can. I mean, there's so many pots that you can dip into depending on that person's makeup and what they can tolerate. And so, but I find homeopathy really nice for this as well. Specific remedies, like one is called Notasan, and I really like that one. It's really helpful and really gentle for like really sort of heightened children who are very sensitive. So so that's that lab. And obviously, did you have questions on that, Lara, or did you want me to move on?
Well, I think all these other viruses, look, the cyclomegaly virus, that sounds pretty awful. And then there's another Epstein-Barr in there. And if you keep scrolling,
this is just that.
But, you know, what's the yellow? Because they shouldn't be there either, right?
No. So her Epstein-Barr, these three, so she's got EBNA1, she's got GP125, and she's got P18. So these are all different types of Epstein-Barr.
And she's picked them up. She's picked them up at different times, do you think?
No, I think this is probably the same one, but they're like different sort of they're like different viral proteins that the body is kind of like responding to.
Okay.
And we don't know. We don't know. Maybe she has had it over different times, but I mean, I don't know. We don't. This doesn't tell us that. But for this one to be, I think what's happened in this particular child is she's had Epstein-Barr in the past, and then it just reactivates. This is kind of what it looks like in this picture, because that's such a strong elevation here. So it looks like it's probably reactivated sort of, and her immune system is in activation mode against this virus. And you think about that, like if your immune system, and this is where we sort of have to, you know, be really sort of intricate with it. If your immune system is busy in this loop of fighting off this stuff, like it's not going to do the things that it's supposed to do. You know, it's not going to serve the purpose it's supposed to. And that's why you see with kids like this, they'll have parasites for like 5 years. They'll have, you know, they'll have yeast that just keeps coming back because the immune system isn't modulated in the correct way to actually do what it's supposed to.
So where do you start then? Where do you start? Stripping back some of these viruses to help the immune system cope, and then work on parasites and the yeast? Or
so I always start with gut first, but it depends on sort of how far we get with that. And in some kids it will be okay and we can get quite far with gut stuff, but if we're finding gut really tricky, then I'd look more into the immune system. But they work hand in hand anyway, so you'd kind of be doing both in tandem, if that made sense. And so and so I think in terms of the immune system, you have to pull back this autoimmune picture. And obviously, like, there are simple things that you can do. Like the first one is gluten. Like if a child's eating loads of gluten and they've got an autoimmune picture, and I saw this recently, and the zonulin on the stool test was through the roof, the anti-gliadin was as well, and they had autoimmunity. And the mum said, yeah, but he doesn't react to gluten. I said, his zonulin's through the roof, you know what I mean? He's not having a physical reaction, but it's triggering leaky gut daily, do you know what I mean? And then therefore leaky gut is part of autoimmunity. So,
and you've got all the symptoms, otherwise you wouldn't be with us. So, you know, you've got to be able to also look at it from a different perspective. It's not just what you see after eating something. Their body just can't manage it.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point to make, is that just because your child isn't having a physical reaction in the moment after eating a junk food or gluten or dairy or whatever it is, it doesn't necessarily mean that like a systemic inflammation level it's not causing that. And I think like that's really important to know, because you know your child might, and some kids can't tell you either. So you know it might be making them feel like rubbish, but they might not be verbal and be able to even tell you that.
They can't feel that, right? A lot of these children can't actually feel their body, and also it's when you're looking at your child now, you've got all those layers that have mounted up over, I don't know, 5 or 6 years for your 6-year-old to be in front of you. that little body can cope with a lot and has done with all the years and all the layers that are now sitting in front of you, that you need to work out, is that child able to eat gluten or dairy or soy or anything else that they maybe are going to be reacting to. But what these labs do is they actually give you a very clear picture of all the things internally in the chemistry that you just can't see. And then you have a plan, you have a roadmap to help your child and take them through that process to heal them from the inside. And then that's going to make, an even bigger difference to how they function, how they behave, how they then start learning, because they'll be ready to learn, because you're taking away all of the things that are effectively their body's fighting the whole time, but you can't see that they're fighting.
I think as well, it's like it's just being it's really like allowing the parent to breathe when they see these lab testing, because it's like in your head, because you've been told by mainstream, like I was and you were for so long, that this is just autism, like you can't do anything about it, this is just how life's going to be. And then it's almost like a really new layer, a really huge layer of hope, because when I read these labs to parents, they're like, oh my goodness, there's all this stuff underneath that that like we didn't know about, and that mainstream told us didn't exist, and this was just autism. And it's like they're just like so excited. And it sounds, you wouldn't think that, because you look at this and go, oh my goodness, my poor child, they're struggling. But actually, from our perspective, it's like, wow, this is such a positive thing, because
exactly,
we have all this stuff that we can work on to help this child. And
I think
it's
also
so lovely.
There's another piece to this, which is, what is autism now? There is so much that is environmentally triggered, as I started off saying at the beginning. And then you see all of these labs, or even just you do 1 or 2 labs, and you can see what's going on. Then you can start to say, well, no wonder he's got all of these symptoms, or she's got all of these symptoms, because there's all this going on inside that I just didn't even know. Their body, their immune system, their nervous system, they're just not able to operate properly, because there's all of these things attacking them on the inside, and also, hosting themselves in there that we really don't need. So let's work out how we can get rid of them. And that's why I just love lab work. And I worked with it for quite a few years, and still don't understand it to the level that you do it at. However, I do know the importance of it and some of the main areas that you should be really focused in on. But I love this. Neural Zoomer Plus from Vibrant America is like a very powerful lab test that you can do to understand what's going on in the brain and why. And what's really impacting those dopamine receptors as well, because that's really key to a lot of the behaviour that you're actually seeing in front of you with your kids.
I mean, honestly, when you look at this, so this strep level, like if a strep level is at this, if this is here, at this, in this risk range, typically you're seeing a child with like OCD who cannot calm down. They might have tics, they might have other sort of involuntary body movements, and you can sort of work that out. And it's so funny, because obviously I've done this for so many years now, and I'm sure you have the same when you see kids, in terms like you just sort of,
you just know.
You get them in. It's like you almost know what the lab test is going to say. And it's so, that's another thing that's empowering, because like you'll get the lab, and obviously I'll speak to the parent and I'll say, I think this is what's going on. And then we'll get the lab and they'll go, how did you know? And it's like, because you get a feel over so many years and seeing so many kids, and obviously where you've been through it with your own child, you can just sort of understand those symptoms. And like, obviously from a parent perspective, like when I first started out, they're just symptoms. They're just like, oh my goodness, why is my child doing that? Why is she stimming? Why is she eloping? Why is she doing all these things? And then when you see the labs, it's like, oh right, now you really understand sort of why they do these things. And then, like you say, once we clear some of this, or once you start rectifying the imbalances, those symptoms that are called autism are no longer there, or they're very significantly improved. And then you think, well, actually, was that child autistic, or was this just a bunch of toxicity, imbalances, viral, immune system dysregulation, gut dysbiosis that once we, and you know this yourself, because I get feedback daily, you know, and I take intricate notes every time I speak to somebody, and it's like you see the transition as you go through, and then they'll give you another feedback, and it's like, oh my goodness, like as we're peeling each sort of toxic burden off, a new little sort of, they're like a little seed that you've sown, and they're little shoots coming through, and then they start blooming, don't they? And it's like, oh my goodness, it's just so fascinating to watch. And yeah, I mean, the narrative needs to be changed.
Okay. So that was really helpful, Vicky. Thank you so much. Because I think going through a Neuralzima Plus test gives parents a great understanding as to what these tests can really show. So I appreciate the time. Thank you very much. And we'll be circling back next time to probably do another lab test and give you some further insights.
Yay. Thanks, everybody. I hope that was really helpful. Thanks for having me. Bye.